Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melody Gerard. I'm a professional development specialist with Edmentum. I am a former teacher. I taught middle school. I was a district specialist for a while. And I don't know if you can hear an accent. I don't personally believe I have an accent, but whenever I leave my home state, people say they can hear it. I am from Texas. I am a Dallas, Texas native, but I currently live in Houston. So I have worked for Houston Independent School District before. And now as a professional development specialist, I get the opportunity to work with people who are implementing Edmentum products. And so today we are, of course, discussing ExactPad. This is my agenda for today. So I'll give you a moment to read that to yourself. And although I have an essential question, I would like to invite you all to think about one question that you hope I answer today. You don't have to put it in the chat or even come off mute or anything. Just think about one thing that you hope I answer about ExactPad, because if I don't, please be sure to ask me at the end. Additionally, I won't be able to see the chat from my view. So if you have questions in the moment, feel free to come off mute. I am diagnosed with ADHD, and one of my not so great character traits is I cut people off. So I don't mind being cut off. So please feel free to come off mute and ask a question in a moment. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. This may be a refresher to some, an introduction to others, but ExactPad is a digital platform for personalized learning. And as a former middle school teacher, you know, I worked with students of all abilities, but I was also alternative certified. So I knew how to make students better readers and writers and thinkers as seventh graders. I really didn't have the deep content knowledge to understand how to target specific concerns for students who didn't know how to read or how to write. So what ExactPath does, it is a complement to you as the instructor to help you find where students have gaps, and not only find where they have the problem, but actually target and address that. The beginning of the student's ExactPath journey begins with a diagnostic assessment. And the way it works is that students take a diagnostic, a computer-generated adaptive diagnostic, meaning that the more questions students answer correct, the more complex the questions become. And using the results of that diagnostic, ExactPath creates a personalized learning plan for each student that will guide them through addressing the gaps identified in the diagnostic. And I keep saying that I want to, make very clear that the learning path is based on the diagnostic, and the diagnostic is based on how the student may have felt the day that they took that diagnostic. So let's first talk about the diagnostic, because that is, of course, where things begin. When students take the diagnostic exam, it will determine their grade level placement for the different domains within each content area. And on the teacher side, you will, of course, get a scale score for each content area, as well as some additional reports that I want to either discuss or introduce to some of you. You will get results in the diagnostic for the class and for the student. The class diagnostic results will look similar to this. It will show you the score, the number of students, the average scale score. And as they take more diagnostics, we recommend, of course, 3 for the year, you'll be able to see the growth between them. And in a moment, I'm going to log in and we'll walk through that, but I want to just explain it first before I do that. So in addition to the class averages, what you will see is individual student performance across a mastery spectrum. So it will show you, based on their content area and their performance, those students who are below, approaching, at, or exceeding grade level for that particular content. And you'll also see what we call the NPR, or National Percentile Rank. That is a number that shows your students, where your students fall nationally for students at that same grade level at that same time of year. So again, we'll look at that, and then you'll also see the student learning path placement. So with the view we're looking at now, this shows you each domain, and this is of course math, and it will show you the grade level equivalent for each domain for each student. And anything that you see in teal means that it is above grade level.
Hey, Melody, I am going to interrupt you. Um,
Sure.
is it my understanding is you can only set one grade level for a class. You can't have a class with students in multiple grade levels.
You can, if the
Oh.
student, because the what happens is it's a personalized learning path. So it is
Hmm.
going to show you as far as the class diagnostic results and then the student diagnostic results, you're going to see for each student. So actually, let's go ahead. If you are able to, I don't know, minimize or do a two screen, I want you all to log into ExactPad. I will log in as a teacher. If there are any participants on the call who have the admin view, your view is a bit different. And I do want to point out that on my screen, you don't see a lot of current data because for there to be current data, I would have to log in as a student and do some work, and I haven't had the opportunity to. So once you log in, and if I'm moving too fast, please feel free to slow me down. I want you to choose a content area and click on it. So that either math, reading, or language arts. Do you all have all three, or do you just use math and reading?
We should all have access to all three.
Perfect. So I'll look at reading, but feel free to look at whichever content area is of interest to you. And then from this view, you'll click on class diagnostic results. And it'll take a moment for my screen to load a bit because for whatever reason, at the end of the day, my Wi-Fi tends to act up. So we are looking at, I'm gonna change my test window to test window 1. And what we see is my students' average score for their reading domain. Their reading diagnostic. The students receive a scale score in each content area, but the way they get that scale score does vary. So you don't want to necessarily compare scores between the different content areas because it isn't a one-to-one match. So in this class, as you can see, I have students of multiple grade levels. When I look at their student performance, I can see that. And then I can also see those students who are below approaching at or above grade level. And when we look in this column that says NPR, and these are, you can change them and sort them. For my student Jose, what this tells me is that Jose did better than 2% of fifth graders who take the diagnostic in the fall. So that's how we would read that. So I will pause for a moment. And for those of you whose students have completed the diagnostic, I want you to look at your student scores and think if there are any students who may surprise you. Students who may have shown that they have a fairly high and proficient academic ability, but a low scale score. Because what that might suggest is the student may not have taken the diagnostic seriously. And so if a student just clicks, they will end up with a low scale score, but that also means that they would end up with an easy learning path. So if that is the case, there are ways to make adjustments. So I'll scroll down more. And now I'm looking at the learning path placement. So remember, if it is in teal, that means that it is above grade level. If you see NA, that's not necessarily a bad thing. NA could mean one of two things. One, it could mean that they were not assessed in that domain, but more than likely, what that means is they assessed above that domain, so they don't have a grade level equivalent to that domain. So this is what we see at the class level. But if you want to, and I do want you to, look at individual results, click on the student's name. So I will, of course, click on a student. Let's look at Marcus, one who has taken the diagnostic. Go to reading, and I'm going to click on test window 1. So with Marcus, his NPR national percentile rank shows him at 31, meaning that he did better than 31% of students in his grade level, which is 4th grade, in the fall diagnostic. Then when we look at the individual results, this is the part of the diagnostic results that I find most interesting because this shows you the student experience. As I mentioned earlier, the diagnostic is adaptive. So as students get questions correct, the question complexity increases. As they get questions incorrect, the complexity decreases. The number of items and the amount of time required to complete the diagnostic will vary depending on how the student responds. Because what the program wants to do is provide questions at a range of grade levels for each domain so that we can determine what is the student's grade level placement. So it is going to start with whatever is their grade level. So Marcus's first question would have, because he had taken it, we have data for him from previous years, so he started at the 2nd grade level. But for a student who's brand new, it would likely start at whatever is their current grade level. And then we have these lines, we call them confidence bars. And you notice the closer we get to the end of the test, the closer those lines or the smaller those lines come, because now we're zeroing in, excuse me, on that student's grade level placement. And when you hover over one of these icons, it will show you the domain, how much time the student spent on the question, and the skill grade. And of course, if it is an X, that means they got it incorrect. If there's a check mark, they got it correct. So we see here in reading, this student went on a pretty good run here with correct answers. What you might notice, though, when you look at multiple students, is you might see a large number of questions in a short amount of time. That would again suggest that the student did not necessarily work with fidelity. So I'll give you a moment, I'll pause here and let you look at a couple of students' test experience and see if you notice anything that may surprise you or anything that is questionable. And so, of course, if you have questions, feel free to come off mute.
So, Melody, I've been adding in the chat and just want to make sure this is still correct. We, over the past couple of years, have recommended, since we work with adults and most of them are working towards high school equivalency, we recommend setting everybody's grade level to 12
Okay.
because exact path will not accelerate them beyond whatever the grade level is in their profile.
Mm-hmm. That's smart. The program does begin at kinder, but it does end at 12. So in the student individual results below their student experience, you will now see how they performed for each domain. When I look at these numbers here, this will show me the number of questions asked and the number of questions correct. And when I hit the plus button, I can now see the skills that were questioned and how they performed. And I can hit expand all and see them all at one time. I don't necessarily advocate going through these results for every student. But what I always recommend is that when you are monitoring your students' experience in ExactPath, if you see students getting a lot of trophies, like maybe a trophy every single time they log in, that would suggest that their learning path is too easy. So if you see that, I would come back to the diagnostic results, take a look at it and see if you think the learning path matches their ability. Conversely, if you see that a student is failing almost every lesson, their learning path might be too high. So you might want to come back, look at the diagnostic and see where there are some major concerns and maybe tweak their learning path that way. And we will talk about how to change learning paths. But that is, of course, where your student's exact path experience begins with the diagnostic. If you have students who, for whatever reason, have not taken the diagnostic, maybe they come to you after the window has closed. That's okay. They don't have to schedule a diagnostic for them. They will have what we call an auto-generated learning path. So if their grade is set to 12, they will begin their exact path learning path at whatever is skill 1 for each subject area at the 12th grade. But let's now talk about how it will adjust and provide a personalized experience for your students. So the learning path is where your students will spend the majority of their time. Our research does show that if students spend 40 minutes per week per subject in their learning path, you will see significant growth between diagnostics. 40 minutes per week may not always be easy. That's okay, because however much time they spend in their learning path, they are getting exactly what they need. So let's talk about what that looks like. The learning path is a set of lesson modules, and each lesson module has 3 components. There is, of course, the lesson that is the direct instruction. It has modeling, it has strategies. And because your students are at the secondary level, their second component, the practice, is embedded into the lesson. The practice is scaffolded practice. So if they get the question wrong, they'll have an opportunity to get the question correct, and then they will receive some feedback. There are a variety of question types. So there may be some questions where it's multiple choice. There may be some with a drop-down menu. There could be some matching. It really just varies. And because it varies and the number of questions in the practice vary, I can't accurately tell you how long a lesson takes because the amount of time required varies. Again, the practice could have a variety of numbers. It could be 10 questions, 8 questions, 12 questions. The progress check is always and only 5 questions. And how your students do on the progress check will determine what the program does next. ExactPath is made for acceleration and remediation, with remediation really being the biggest part. 2 things I want you to remember. In our program, 1, there are always 2 opportunities for mastery. And in our program, mastery is 80%. So when a student attempts a skill lesson, if they get 80% or better on their progress check, so 4 out of 5 questions correct, they will get a digital trophy, and then they will advance or accelerate to whatever is the next skill identified on their learning path. If students do not master that skill, that's when things get a bit more interesting. Remember, you get 2 opportunities for mastery. So that student will take that exact same lesson for a second time. So if you hear a student say, I already did this, they did, they just did not get 80%. If they get the trophy that second time they take it, awesome. They mastered it, they'll accelerate. If they do not, that is when remediation automatically kicks in. So there's nothing on the teacher side that you have to do. You don't have to push a button or hit a switch. It will immediately go into remediation. And in our program, that remediation is called building blocks. Building blocks address additional gaps that may be preventing the student from mastering that skill. And it could be a lesson on either an alternate lesson or a lesson at a lower grade level. So I'm just throwing out something that is definitely not at the 12th grade level. But let's say that the student did not master the skill of counting to 120. They might get a building block of counting to 100. So let's look at how that remediation pathway works. And if you're new to Exact Path, I promise this is probably the most difficult part. And I know you don't have a reason to trust me, but trust me, this is probably the most difficult part of the program. And I don't even think it's difficult. So again, when they take that skill, they get 80% or better, they accelerate. If they don't, they'll take it for a second time. If they still don't, they get the building block. The building block is a lesson. So the student still has those same three components. If the student masters the building block, they will return to the original skill to take that same lesson for a second retake, which is a third attempt. If the student does not master the building block, remember they get 2 opportunities for mastery in Exact Path. They will take that exact same lesson for a second time. If they still do not master it, they will get a second building block. So now maybe instead of counting to 100, they drop to counting to 50. If they master the second building block, they return to the first building block. Then from the first building block, they return to the original skill. If they do not master the second building block, they will take it for a second time. If they still do not master the building block, they will not get a third. At that point, it is considered a failed skill. We don't want the students in a constant cycle of not doing well, because to get to that point requires them to have multiple lessons, which means they're not advancing through their learning path. So they're not getting to the lessons that have been identified based on their diagnostic. So again, it is considered failed. They will move on to the next skill. So when you start seeing your students or program participants feeling like, this is boring and I keep getting the same things, it could be because they're not taking the lessons seriously. And so it is a different experience if you don't actually try and work with fidelity, because you will find yourself constantly doing the same skills. Conversely, the program is really geared towards remediation. So if you have students who are, your high flyer students, their experience in Exact Path may be a bit difficult, or because they may have fewer skills to choose from, fewer skills on their learning path, or they may be practicing skills that are beyond what they've learned. And so it's a bit more difficult. It's harder for them to get their trophies. So just kind of keep those things in mind. So before we log into the platform again, I want to say that along the way, before the students get to that X, as teachers, you are getting the data on your end so that you are able to intervene before they get to that X. So if you still have your Exact Path up, at the top, I would like you to click on the word Edmentum. That will take you back to your teacher homepage. And your homepage, as long as you have students doing some work, your homepage should look something like this. What you might want to do, because this page can get a bit overwhelming, is you see across the top where you have class, subject, and time period. You might want to filter that to only look at one particular subject. And then if you don't have a lot of data to look at, especially if you all were closed last week for Thanksgiving, you can adjust your time period to look at a different time, a different gap, or you can expand and look at more days. Your teacher homepage will prioritize the students who are of the greatest need. It is going to first show you those students who need attention. They need intervention. That means that they have failed a skill, So they've gotten all the way through those building blocks and still did not do well. It could mean that they are not getting 80% of the practice questions on a building block. There are a couple of reasons why they may show up here, but they definitely need some teacher intervention. So what you'll see under status is either an X, a red box, or a exclamation mark for struggling. You'll see the subject area. The student task will either say progress check or practice. Under skill grade, that shows you the grade level of the lesson that they were working on. And the interesting part of this page is the time on task. Because if you see that a student has not mastered next to a progress check, especially if it's reading, and the time on task says 1 minute and 3 seconds, I promise you, they did not work with fidelity. They just did some clicking. So that's the first column. The second column, the may need support. These are students who might need a conversation. So instead of, immediate intervention, instead maybe they need some encouragement. May need support may mean that they're on their first retake of a skill, or they are on their first attempt, but not doing so well on the practice. And then, of course, we want to always recognize success. So the third column, when you click there, that is going to show you the students who have earned trophies and deserve some recognition. In addition to the data that you see on the teacher homepage, you have two other data visualizations that I want to talk about, and I want to do that in the platform. So I'm going to log back in. And if you click on reading, you can click on current activities. If you were still looking at your diagnostic results, you could just click on learning paths. In ExactPath, there are always multiple ways to get to the same destination. My question for you all, do students work on their learning path in class, or is this like distance learning? How does that look?
For most of us, it would be distance learning or maybe like open computer lab time.
Okay. So if it is, for those who come in during computer lab, when you look at the current activities view, this will show you what's on each student's screen or participant screen. You'll be able to see what they are working on right now. There are these different icons, and we're going to talk more about those icons, but you will see those as they correspond. The column that says previous skill will have whatever skill they completed before the one that they're currently working on. So in this column, you will either see trophies or X's. If you see ready, set, go, that means the student has not completed a skill yet. This last column where it says next skill, that's the next skill identified on their learning path. But if your students get a building block for their current skill, that is not what you will see under next skill. I want to call your attention to the left column where you have the students' names. What you'll see here is the skill grade of their current skill. And here you may see a variety of things. If you see LP1 right here, that means that the learning path the student has is based on their diagnostic, the first diagnostic that they took during this academic period. If you're looking and it says auto right here, that means that student has the auto-generated learning path I discussed earlier. It is the one that is going to start them at skill 1 for their grade level. But we went through the remediation pathway. So even if your student is working on an auto-generated learning path, the lessons will go up or down based on how they perform. So if you have any students who enroll in the program after the diagnostic period, you won't necessarily have to give them a diagnostic. You can just let them work on the auto-generated one. And then when your students take the next diagnostic, that LP1 will now say LP2 because the learning path that they have will be completely replaced. based on the diagnostic from the middle of year. That also means that if there was a skill they practiced on their first learning path, but they don't show proficiency on the diagnostic, that skill would show up again on their learning path. So even though they may have an X now, they could possibly see that skill again, and maybe that time they won't have an X, and they'll do better. Your current activities view will give you like a Google Street view of the class. But when you click on Knowledge Map, now you're looking at more of a Google Maps view. This will show you across a continuum of skills at the top how the class or the students who are organized in that one class period, how they are doing. And so you may have to do some scrolling before you actually see some of the icons there. But what this allows you to do is to notice some trends. So if you see vertically that you have, and in this particular class, I just don't, if you see vertically, you have some students who are struggling with the same skill, those may be students that could benefit from the same intervention. And so if you happen to see them in person, maybe you can just pull those kids, those participants to the side and have a conversation with them. Now, with you all looking at your knowledge map, I want to discuss these icons a bit more. On the knowledge map, your legend is on the left side, and these icons help understand the data a bit more and create a clearer picture. So let's discuss that. You'll see these same icons on the teacher homepage, the current activities, and the knowledge map. The mastered and not mastered icons, that's easy to understand. Mastered means they got 80% or better on their progress check, so they got their trophy. Not mastered means that they went through that whole remediation pathway and still did not master the skill. If you see, or where you see that green stripe, that means that is a skill based on their diagnostic that they assessed above. If you see the kind of gray stripe, that means that they may not have diagnostic data, so they were placed above that skill. So you may see that on some of your auto-generated learning paths. And like if your students are coded at the 12th grade, they would be placed above like 4th and 5th grade skills. If it looks like there's nothing there, that's the not taken. That means that is a skill that hasn't been assessed. But because you all take the diagnostic, our diagnostic, I don't think you'll see the not taken too much. And then the skill omitted means that either at the admin level or through altering the student's learning path, that particular skill has just been taken out of the domain. I'm sorry, out of the learning path. So you have your assessed above, your placed above. The solid blue box means that is a skill that they are currently practicing. So what might it mean if you see that solid blue box in the middle of a bunch of green or middle of a bunch of gray? Because theoretically, they should have been assessed or placed above that skill. So that could mean a couple of things. It could mean one, they did well in that domain, but that particular skill they did not show proficiency on when they took the diagnostic. So it may be kind of a one-off type of skill. But it could also mean that they are practicing a building block. And let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go back to my learning path here. So I have a student, my student Kayla. You see we have this building block. It is for the skill identifying thing. So when I see that building block there, I want to scroll this way to see what she's currently practicing. That was identifying skill at the 9th grade level. So here she is practicing theme at the 8th grade level. Because remember, the building block is in support of that skill. So that also means that this icon will change once she completes the progress check for the first time. So let's talk about what I mean by that. The icon might change to struggling if after she completes the lesson, she has not shown that she's mastered 80% of the practice questions. When you see the struggling symbol on the knowledge map, what you'll want to do is go back to your teacher homepage, because the column that it shows up on there will help you understand what could happen next. If you see struggling under the column that says may need support, that means this student is close to having a building block next. If you see struggling under needs attention, that means that if this student does not do well on their progress check, it's likely going to be a failed skill. So when you see it show up on the knowledge map, go to your teacher homepage and check to see if it is under may need support. Because if it's there, you still have a good amount of time to intervene and help. This retaking icon with the arrow will either have a 1 or a 2. If there is a 1, that means that the student is on their first retake. And remember, that occurs the first time a student takes a skill and they didn't master the progress check. So the icon will move from that solid blue to the blue with the number 1. What that also means that if the student does not master the progress check, they're about to get a building block. If this retaking icon has a number 2, that is actually a reason to celebrate, because a student will not get a second retake, which is a third attempt, unless they have mastered a building block first. So if you see a 2 there, you may want to encourage them, because what that means is they are close to getting a trophy. So the 1, they're close to getting a building block. The 2, they're close to getting a trophy. So let me go back to my learning path here. I'm sorry, my knowledge map. And again, I want to give you some time to notice any of your students, see if you see any trends vertically. If you see, like this student, our student Kayla, you see a solid blue line in the midst of a bunch of green, you'll want to scroll to see, is that a building block? Because it just might be. And as you're looking at that, if you have any thoughts, concerns, questions, again, please feel free to come off mute. So now that we kind of see a bit more how to monitor the student's progress, the natural question then becomes, what next? How do you respond to the student progress? So I have some good news and some not as good news. If your students happen to be practicing anything from 8th grade below, there are lots of resources that you can assign to help those students and intervene where necessary. If they are practicing skills from 9th grade and up, there are not really as many resources right now. So let's talk about the resources that, of course, are there. These icons on the knowledge map, as well as those on the current activities, are links. So when you click on a skill, click here, click on this one. It brings up what we call our resource drawer. Actually, I am just going to change the grade level here just so I know that I can see more of what I'm looking for. When I click here, it brings up what we call our resource drawer. The first thing, if you have clicked on one, what I would like you to do is click on progress check, because this will show you when you hover over it and you click review skill. Now you can see the questions that were asked in the progress check and the answers that they provided. I'm looking at a reading progress check. So this does and did require the student to do some reading. So if your students are practicing their reading learning path, it should take them a lot more than 1 minute to do. And let me also take a moment to say that if you don't set an expectation that students are working and completing minutes in each learning path, and all you say is, I want you to work in your learning path, most of them will choose math because those lessons are shorter than the reading and the writing ones. But this will allow you to see how the question was asked and maybe gain some insight into how they answered the question. A few weeks ago, I was working with a teacher who was looking at math. And she said, after she looked at the progress check, she said, I think this student thought those commas were decimals. And I asked, is this a student who needs glasses? And she said, yes, he does need to be tested. And so that could give you a different type of conversation to have once you look at those answers. If I click learning path, this will now allow me to review the lesson that the student received, as well as look at the practice questions and the answers that were given. So I know that you all have lots and lots and lots of free time with nothing else better to do. So you could, if you just want to, go through and look at the tutorial or the lesson that the student received. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Your standard coverage, and if I look at this right now, it's going to show New York because I'm currently in the state of New York working with teachers. But when you click standard coverage, it will show you how this lesson is aligned to your Minnesota standards. If there's nothing there, that means it is a skill that is in our program, but not in your standards. And then when you click resources, if you are looking at skills that are 8th grade and below, you'll see a lot more resources, but not every skill is created the same. So some skills have more resources than others. What you might see in this portion of the resource drawer are additional lessons that you can assign. Perhaps the student needs to see the information in another way. So there are videos that you could assign to students to watch. It could be, somewhere around 2 to 3 minutes long. There are worksheets in the system that will help you. And again, these lessons are single skill focused. So these resources are single skill focused. So there are worksheets that you can print. You can't assign the worksheets, but you do get an answer key. And then there are these lesson ideas. So if you have opportunities to do live teaching, the lesson ideas are lesson plans, and it will guide you through teaching that particular skill. It gives you the questions to ask, the things to say. If there are any like manipulatives or something that you may have to cut out, that's included as far as like, the Black Line Masters. There are considerations for your English language learners, your struggling students, your advanced students. And again, these were written for small groups, so there is an assignment attached because, of course, that's always the final part of the small group session is to see did they actually learn it. And these are printable. And you can find those by clicking on these icons where a student has done some work, or to find them more directly, at the top in the black menu ribbon, click on Assess and Teach. And you all are looking at what we call the priority skill lesson. From here, you can look for resources by searching by the standard or by the skill. And I am going to do some filtering here. Say 11th grade reading informational text. And then let's go with central ideas. When I click go, this brings up the resources that are available. So something I want to point out here. Again, just a reminder, some skills have more resources than others, but also this is a program that begins at the kindergarten level. So you may see some learning path resources that say K through 5 and 6 through 12. There is a different student interface at different grade levels. So kinder through second is a really colorful underwater theme with large icons because a lot of those students use iPads, and so it's easier to navigate. The lessons are broken up into chunks, and the students have to do each one in order. Grades 3 through 5, that interface looks like it's like a hot air balloon theme. And it looks a bit more grade level appropriate, and the students can do the lesson or the practice in whatever order they want, but they must complete both in order to do the progress check. But then you have those at the 6th and 12th grade content style. That is going to look like what your students are used to seeing with the rest of their lessons. So if you assign any additional lessons, you want to make sure that you choose the one that says 6 to 12 content style. And if you see a lesson, you'll want to maybe preview it, see if it's something that you want to assign. And if you do want to assign it, it's very easy to do. You would click assign. You have the option of changing the assignment title. So maybe you want to, I don't know, write a date on there or something, or your name. That's fine. You must select an end date, but you have the option of enforcing it. So if you enforce the end date, and I set this one to December 19th, after December 19th, the student cannot access at all. If I do not enforce the end date, they can, it will just show as an overdue assignment. You could assign it to all students. You can just choose the student that you want to assign it to. And when you click assign, the next time they log in, they will see an assignment from their teacher. I will log in eventually as a student so that you can see how that looks. But I first want to see if there are any questions about anything that we've discussed so far. And then I want to actually talk about what the lessons look like for your students. So does anyone want to come off mute and ask any questions about anything we've discussed so far?
Could you show where to find those printable small group lessons again?
Yes. So you can either find it by clicking assess and teach and then doing some filtering, or if you're looking at a specific content area and you can go to either the current activities or the knowledge map, it doesn't matter which one, but if you where you see a student has done some work, I'll just click here. And again, some skills may have more resources than others, so you might not see the lesson ideas for every skill you look at. But when you click resources, you can find it here, or again, by clicking assess and teach, and it is under your priority skill lessons. So I can be quiet for a second and give you some time to look through the resources to see if there's anything that you might want to assign. And also keep in mind, you all have the license, so you have these resources and you can use them however you want. So if you are doing some live instruction and you're looking for some resources to supplement that, search to see if we have anything that you can use. You could think, consider it like maybe next week I'm going to teach something that's pretty complex. You could assign, like maybe you're going to teach theme at the 11th grade level, but you have some students who are struggling with that. You could then decide to maybe assign a theme lesson from 8th grade this week so that it kind of preps their brain a bit more to study that next week. If you want to assign some additional homework, you can find a lesson, find some activities in there, print it or assign it, use it however you see fit. And I do know that they are adding resources. And so Eventually, there'll be more resources for more skills. I just don't get invited to the meetings where they talk about when those things are coming. So hopefully you all are finding some valuable resources in there that you can use either to intervene with your students where you see some exclamation marks or even some X's, or to use for your own instruction. And I want to look at what the tutorials look like at the secondary level. Each tutorial will begin with this 17-second video that just, kind of welcomes them to the lesson. Then there is the title, the objective, the table of contents. It's going to, go into an introduction. It may be a warm-up activity there. It just really depends. On the left side of the screen, there are some navigation tools I want to talk about. With the table of contents, I am looking at this from the student side, so I can jump ahead. Your students won't be able to do that. They can only move backwards. Let's stay here and go to the next page here. The Exact Path platform is hosted on the same platform as our credit recovery. So the credit recovery courses look exactly like this. In the credit recovery class, there are multiple resources here but for some of the lessons that your students take, this resources folder might be empty. So if you see it and there's nothing there, that's why, because the resources are on the courseware credit recovery side. They have an on-demand dictionary where they can type in a word or copy and paste a word, and they'll see the definition as well as receive a pronunciation. And this part is the part I find to be the most brilliant. It is the reading tools. The lessons for grades 6 and up can be translated into 75 different languages. 25 of those languages have text to speech, and then English, Spanish, and I believe French. You can also change the dialect to hear a more natural sounding voice. English, so you can change the dialect there so your students can listen to Joanna talk, they can listen to Matthew talk. Maybe you have some students who are from Great Britain or who like to watch. I used to love watching British sitcoms on PBS, and maybe they'd like to listen to Amy the British lady talk. They can change it to her voice, use the text to speech, and it'll take a second to think, and then it'll start
Word
talking.
relationships. Let's begin by exploring how word relationship.
If the students need to constantly hear the text to speech, they can hit autoplay and it'll begin reading as soon as, after they go to each page. They won't have to hit play each time. And then to translate, they would simply click here. And I'm showing you this because you can't set a translation on the teacher side. They have to do it on their own. They would choose that box and then find the language that they want to learn in. So I do have a friend who is a Persian native, and her and her family speak Farsi. So it takes a second, and it'll translate to that language. It is continuous translation. So when I go to the next page, that's a video. So let me go on. It'll take a second to think, and then it will translate. Now, if the student wants to use the highlighter features, it will tell them that they will have to reset the language to English. I don't know why you cannot highlight in Farsi, but right now you can't, only in English. But again, there are 75 different languages. And I was an ESL certified teacher when I was a classroom teacher, and I know the mental load that students face when they have to listen to something in English, translate it in their brain, think about it in their thinking language, translate it, and then state it or write it. And when we're thinking about doing remediation, helping them close academic gaps, if we can ease the mental load, that will allow them again to think, to learn in the language that they think in. So that is how the lessons look for your students. Any thoughts, questions, comments there?
Is there some way to know which skills have those principal lessons without clicking into every single skill at every grade level?
Let me make a note of that because I believe we have that somewhere and I can
Okay,
send it to you.
thank you.
I'm just writing that down. That's a great question. Okay, so we've talked about the diagnostic and the reports there, the learning path. We've looked at the data for the learning path, how to address, the needs that we may see. I want to now look at reports. For our reports, when you click there, you will see three types of reports. Your learning path availability is just going to show you which students have a learning path. That isn't a report that you will likely run often. Your skills performance, due to the nature of your participants, this might not be a report that you run often either, but what this will show you is your like grade level. And if every student is set at 12th grade, it will show you, and let me just run that looks like, and I'll just choose 11th grade math, click view report. What this will show you is how many of your students, according to their data in the program, are not ready to learn that skill. So you'll see the percentage and in parentheses, the number of students that are assigned to you that based on their performance, based on their learning path, the diagnostic, that is a skill that they're not ready to learn. And for those who have actually attempted it, you will see the percentage and the number of those who have failed it, mastered it, or currently practicing it, or based on their diagnostic or any changes made to their learning path, which we will discuss, were placed above it. That's the skills performance. Your learning path progress is a report that you may find yourself running often, especially if you want to really keep an eye on who is getting that 40 minutes if you're really encouraging them to stick to that. This report actually has two reports in it. So with the summary, you can choose to look at the data for a specific time period. So you can change that there. If you don't make any changes, then it'll just show you for the entire academic year. You can choose to look by content area or click on all and you'll see all of them. You can choose your classes. And then once you run view report, what you're seeing is a summary of the class. So you can see how much time they spent on their learning path, how many skills were assessed, and of those that were assessed, how many were mastered and not mastered, the trophies. And then I want to point out the difference between this total time on system and time on task learning path. Total time on system is going to show you the sum of students working in all three content areas, plus any assignments that you may give them. Time on task learning path will only show you the amount of time students have spent on their lesson, practice, or progress check, actively engaged for whatever content area you've selected. The system, ideally, this would show if you have, three content areas. If you ran this after a week, ideally your time on task would be at least 120 minutes. So that's is my math right? 40, 40, 40, 100, so it's 2 hours. And then your time on task for this particular content area will show 40 minutes, ideally, if they're getting that time. But you will notice some discrepancies, and there are a couple of reasons for that. I was recently working with a principal who ran this report for reading, and he saw a student's total time on system was like 2 hours and 32 minutes, but time on learning path was 0. And I said, he was like, how can that be? I said, let's look at that report for math. For math, the time on task was 2 hours and 32 minutes. And I told him, I said, what's happening here is your teachers are just saying, get on your learning path instead of saying, do your reading learning path. And if students get to choose, they will choose math because those lessons are shorter. You may also see some discrepancies here if students do not properly log out of their learning path. So if they just close their device, if they just close the browser or the window, it will terminate their session. And we have a cleanup service running in the background. So every 5 minutes, there's a system working in the background, calculating any idle time and just making adjustments on the learning path time based on that. So if a student hits the back button, instead of logging out and they go backwards to their learning path, or they hit back to another website, or if for whatever reason the student logs into ExactPath in multiple Windows tabs or devices, which doesn't seem like something that would happen, but I was at a school yesterday where a student had 10 tabs open and was logged into ExactPath on each one. And whatever was the latest one is the one where the minutes are counting because it's terminating the other sessions. And with that cleanup service, let's say that you tell students from 9 o'clock to 9:30, I want you working in your learning path. So the student may log on at 9 o'clock. They might work 10 focused minutes and then daydream for 6 minutes. At 10:16, their time on task at 9:30, their time on task won't be 30 minutes. It will be 16 minutes. No, it'll be 11 minutes. It'll be that 10 minutes that they focused, and then they drifted for 6 minutes, but that 5 minutes is going to push them back because it's running at every 5 minutes, and they'll end up with like 1 minute of idle time counted into their time on task. If a student works from 9 o'clock to 9:15, hits the back button and walks away from their computer at 9:30, their time on task is going to say 15 minutes. So you'll want to tell them, make sure that you hit save and exit because one, it will help them next time they log in, they'll be able to pick up exactly where they left off. And two, it will accurately count their minutes. The system will also automatically log students out after an hour. So if the student just closes their laptop or just lets the screen go dark. So at 9 o'clock, they worked. At 10 o'clock, at 9:15, if they do nothing else, they go idle. At 10:15, it's going to log them out. And the cleanup service is going to find when they were last active to count the rest of that as idle time. And so their time on task will say 15 minutes. So if your focus is on getting that 40 minutes, make sure that you tell your participants or your students to make sure that they're hitting save and exit because it is counting the time actively engaged with their lessons. So you'll see that overview on the summary page for your learning path progress, but maybe there's a specific student who you want to look at. You would click detail, and now you can choose the student. And when you click view report, what you see now is every lesson the student has completed, and you'll see the domain and the content, the date they did it, how much time they spent, and if it is the progress check, you'll be able to see the score they got. I wouldn't necessarily, I don't know if you all have a grade book system. I wouldn't use this for grades if you do, But this just allows you, if you're having a conference with someone or you just want to talk about their exact path experience, this allows you to at least see their scores. And then if you have students come to you saying, I keep getting the same lessons, this is boring, I don't like it. If you look at this report, you can see how much time they spent. And you can see, well, you keep taking the same lesson because you keep breezing through it every time you get it, and you only take 2 minutes. So you can see that report there as well. And if you are one of my friends who likes to take pictures of slides, I'm not allowed to send the PowerPoint out, but if you want to take a picture of this slide, this just gives you an overview of what each of those reports are that I just discussed. So if you are the picture taking type, just may be a slide that you want to take a picture of. So now I want to open the floor up for any questions. At the beginning, I did ask you all to come up with a question you hope that I answered about exact path. So if I didn't answer that question, please feel free to come off mute now and ask it. Or if another question has popped up in your mind and you want to discuss it, go for it.
So there were a lot of changes, not so much with exact path, but with Edmentum reporting generally that happened over the summer.
Mhm.
Um, have there been any changes since then, and are any more in the works or planned?
So there have not been any updates just yet. Any changes that do occur, you'll get a pop-up window when you log in that will show you those changes. I know that there are things that are roadmapped and changes that are being discussed, but like I mentioned before, I don't get invited to those meetings, so I don't know when those things will roll out. What I have noticed just with my time with the company, they tend to do those more in the summertime than in the middle of an academic year. I don't know if you all operate on an academic year like a traditional K-12 school does, but a lot of times those updates are done more in like June, July.
Sure, thank you.
Mhm. I think that is the first time I've ever been asked that question. So thank you.
In Minnesota adult education, the time on task reports are very important because they're linked to our funding. So, yeah, we care about
Um,
those.
Understood. And I do want to share that, like I said, there are some natural discrepancies that could occur. But if you're seeing some really wild discrepancies, and let me show you when you might see that. I want to log in as a student. If you're seeing some really big discrepancies, send Andrew an email so that maybe we can have support look into that. And I want to log in as a student because I want you to see how students are able to track their time also. So this is how the platform looks when your students log in. So they'll have a card for each of their learning paths. And when they click on usage, they can see their time on task for each content area. This resets every Monday night. So if you look at that report on a Friday afternoon and your students do some work over the weekend, when they show up Monday morning, their minutes are going to look different than your report because it resets on Mondays. So I would say to look at, if you're running that report, look at their time Monday afternoon so that you can see for the week how they are getting their 40 minutes. Because some of them may choose to get their 40 minutes outside of their expected work time, which that is a big thing, especially if you're focusing on time. And Most of the programs I work with are K-12 programs, and so I always tell people to focus more on those minutes than on trophies because it could be harder for some students to get trophies than others. So it's great that you all are looking at the time on task. Any other questions? So if not, oh, I'm seeing myself. It's gotten dark outside, so I really look weird here. So those are all of the things that I have on our agenda to discuss today. Again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to email your customer success manager. And if there are any other questions that I can answer, I definitely will. If I can't, I'll try to get the answer. But if there's nothing else, that is all that I have for you all today. And I hope that you found some value in this and that this may give you a deeper or better, clearer understanding of the Exact Path program.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melody. I've seen a similar presentation a couple times, but I did learn a couple things this time, so thank you.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
We knew about the 60 minutes when they would get logged out, but I didn't know that it was only 5 minutes of idle time when it stopped tracking. So that's very good for us to know.
Oh, you know what? One thing I didn't show you all, and I mentioned about the learning path and editing. Does everyone
Mhm.
know how to edit a learning path?
Why don't you go ahead and demo that? I think that'd be helpful.
Will do. Let me share my screen again. And I will need to log back in as a teacher. So if you find that a student's learning path is too easy, which could happen if they, just kind of click through their diagnostic, or maybe even if you find that their learning path is too difficult and you want to give them some opportunities to get a win, to get a trophy, then what you can do is, it doesn't matter which content area you click on. It doesn't matter if you click on current activities or knowledge map. Either one will take you there because there are always multiple ways to get to the same place in Exact Path. But from either one of those, the current activities or the knowledge map, click on the student's name. And from here, this is where you can change the content area. You would click on skills, and then to the right, there is a button that says edit learning path placement. And when you click here, what you can do is change the grade level for each domain and then change the skill that you want them to begin practicing. So, and I'm just looking at the first class that came up, which is my K2. So I can change this skill to first grade, but you make the changes that you see fit. And then I would choose the skill I want them to begin with. Let's say use strategies there. And I make those changes and I hit save, then their learning path has been adjusted. I don't know when you all are planning to take your middle of year, but if you are going to do that within, December or January, may not make any changes to the learning path until after that diagnostic and see, what kind of new learning path they get and if there needs to be any changes made there. But if you're ready to make those changes too, go for it. And that's the easiest way to do it. Okay. Anything else? Well, if not, I hope that you all have a terrific Thursday and a fabulous Friday and a wonderful weekend. And again, if any questions come up, please feel free to reach out.